They had a particularly difficult position to try to knock the Germans out of during the Battle of the Bulge. And I happened to be on the flight line that day, and they told all of us that we didn't have to go if we didn't want to. But they took 2 squadrons of us over there, and the place that we went in to bomb and strafe was 1,500 feet higher than where our airport was, and the ceiling was 500 feet then. And that was one of the few times that I left the airport with the idea that that might be the last one, but it wasn't. So it stuck in my mind. Well, the highlight, of course, had to be my overseas experience. I landed in England just ahead of D-Day, and it was a few days before they cleared us to fly. And in the meantime, I'd gotten assigned as a ground support pilot for the 1st and the 9th Armies, which meant that we were flying pretty close to the ground all the time, and dive bombing and strafing and skip bombing. And I could just spend all the rest of our time telling you about all the fun I had. Now, it wasn't fun to go out and kill somebody, don't misunderstand me, but the excitement of your life, and you got up every morning knowing that you had to go out and what you had to do. And people said, "Didn't that bother you?" And I said, "Not after the first day." And it didn't bother me. But I got in 68 missions by the end of the war in Europe, and they wanted to know if I wanted to go to China, and I said, "No, I've had my share, and you guys just go ahead and do it." Well, I'll tell you, she was quite a gal, and of course, you can imagine I would defend her at any place, but she lived till she was 102, and she was widowed when I was 4, and there were 4 of us boys, and the oldest one was 6 years old, and the youngest was 6 months. And her family had already moved to Wyoming before this happened, and we were in Missouri, Canton, Missouri, a little town on the Mississippi. So our grandparents took us in, and we learned how to milk cows and hoe the garden and do everything. And my mother at the same time was getting a job as teaching school in the country schools at that time. And you talk about the 30s, this was a tough time, and you talk about her being a tough woman. She was actually paid at one time during the Depression by school warrants that were not cashable. There was no money in the bank. The ranchers hadn't gotten any money for their hay. They hadn't gotten any money out of the cattle, hardly speaking, and everybody was just having a tough time. So anyhow, it was a great education, and that was the beginning of the time when I decided I didn't want to be poor. So and by the time I was 14, when I could work all day for $1 a day and my room and board, I made my mind up that wasn't what I wanted to do in my life. I met her at a party in California. I was learning how to fly, and of course, young GIs, 19 and 20 years old, we were all looking for a hoopla, and I thought that was the cutest little girl I had seen. And we met, and I guess that was the beginning of it, because that was in February, and by the end of May, we were married. So you talk about a long courtship, huh? And then, of course, I had to go overseas, which wasn't too smart, but then we didn't think about smart in those days. And so it worked out. The university in the 1940s was just a cowtown university. There's no kidding about that. And one of the things that I recall, and I don't know why this sticks in my head, but Prexy's pasture was so repugnant at that time. All we had was rocks and sand and wind. But we had some grand people at that time, some of which you would know about, having your family there now. They were there. Dr. Knight was one of the top people of the world, you know, and many others. But my life indoctrination came about with the fact that young people need some help. And I was one of them that needed some help, and I got some help. But we decided at that time, both Esther and I, that we would have a life of not necessarily philanthropy, because at that time I wasn't making that much money, but to try to help other students. All of us who are in a gainful business of one kind or another have a moral obligation, and maybe even deeper than that, to try to help those people who are not as fortunate as we are. No end is when you run out of money, that's when you quit.